鬼岛之音
Ghost Island Media. Welcome to The Taiwan Take by Ghost Island Media. I'm your host, Emily Waiwu. Today, we discuss a new documentary on the forgotten story of one of the greatest Taiwanese Olympian athletes and his American rival at the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome. Mike Chinoy is an American journalist who has spent 24 years as a foreign correspondent for CNN. He was the network's first bureau chief in Beijing and has won the Emmy, the DuPont, and the Peabody Awards for his coverage of the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre. He is the author of 5 books. He has been to North Korea 17 times, and now he lives in Taipei. Hello, Mike.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We have also Frank W. Chen. Frank is a Taiwanese-Canadian documentary filmmaker who specializes in sports. His previous work includes the 2018 film on the Taiwanese baseball player Wang Jianming, who was a starting pitcher for the New York Yankees in 2006 and 7. The film was nominated for a Golden Horse Award in Taiwan and won audience awards in Los Angeles and Vancouver. Hello, Frank.
Hello.
You have teamed up to make this documentary on the friendship and the rivalry between C.K. Yang from Taiwan and Rafer Johnson from the U.S. The year is 1960. Taiwan, under the name Republic of China, is still a permanent member of the United Nations. C.K. Yang, an indigenous athlete from Taidong, would become the first person with a Chinese surname to ever win an Olympics medal. Chuan-kwang. He wore a jersey bearing the flag of the ROC, representing a team called Formosa. In the U.S., the civil rights movement is underway, but it would be another 3 years until Martin Luther King's speech, I Have a Dream. In the summer of 1960, Rafer Johnson became the first Black American athlete to bear the flag for the U.S. Olympic team. The 45-minute documentary titled Decathlon, the C.K. Yang and Rafer Johnson story was released this summer during the 2024 Paris Olympics. Written by our guest today, Mike Chinoy, and directed by Frank W. Chen. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming in today.
My pleasure.
Thanks for having us.
Now, today I want to talk about the athletes, the stories, how you got together to put together the story. But first, decathlon, what is it?
The decathlon is the hardest event in sports. It's 10 events. It involves running, jumping, throwing. It's from the original Olympics. Deca is 10. And it's generally considered that the person who wins the decathlon at the Olympics is considered the world's greatest athlete because they have won a 100-meter dash, a 400-meter dash, a 1,500-meter dash, a pole vault, a javelin, a long jump, a high jump, a discus, shot put. It takes tremendous physical skill of multiple varieties to do that. So people competing for the top spot in the decathlon at the Olympics are basically considered to be competing for the title of the greatest athlete in the world. And that's partly what makes this story and this rivalry so compelling.
And it's so difficult to win a decathlon gold at the Olympics that only 2 men have ever done it more than once. So leading up to the 1960 Summer Olympics in Rome, the rivalry between C.K. Yang and Rafer Johnson captivated the world, as we would see in your documentary. They are friends who have trained together. They had the same coach, and now they're going head to head. Mike, you've been working on this project for quite some time now. Just exactly how long have you been working on this film, and what was the genesis for the project?
The project originated when John Krich, who co-wrote the script and was sort of the co-creator of the project, got to know C.K. Yang in 2006. John was working for the Asian Wall Street Journal doing a series on Asian Olympic legends in the run-up to the Beijing Games. And he vaguely remembered C.K. Yang from his youth, and he came to Taiwan and he tracked him down. And they became very friendly, and they spent a lot of time together. And John videotaped hours and hours of interviews with C.K. And he wrote his article for the Asian Wall Street Journal. And then C.K. died. And for years after that, John and I had talked about, is there something we could do with this material? And there were a lot of false starts and alleys that ended up going nowhere and so on. And it was only when we connected with Frank in 2019, I had seen his fantastic documentary, Late Life, about baseball player Wang Zhenmin. And I reached out to him, and he immediately got the idea of the story. And that's really when the project took off.
The many hours and hours of interviews that you talked about with C.K. Yang, we'll come back to that. But as just a note, you said this really started in 2006, and C.K. Yang died the next year. But Frank, so you came across this in 2019. C.K. Yang is one of the greatest athletes to have ever represented the people of Taiwan. Growing up in the 80s myself, I had vaguely remembered his name. He was born in 1933 in Taidong. He was a part of the Amis indigenous peoples. He became known as the Iron Man of Asia after he won gold in Asian Games in 1954. What was your memory of C.K. Yang, and what was it about this man that's captured your attention?
I've always known this name since I was really young because I remember, if I remember correctly, he was in our textbook. Or there was this publication called Hansen Xiaobaike. And of course, in all like newspapers and reports, I read about Yazhou Tian, right? So I knew how great he was back then, but to be honest, I didn't know what he looked like. When Mike reached out, I thought it was, okay, it was interesting. I know the name, but I had to go online and then read about it because there's just not much known what he did, what his achievement was. And I had to look up Rafer Johnson too, because I know the name as well, because I grew up in the U.S. and, you know, sometimes his name would be mentioned on ESPN or in a lot of reports. So
you were born in Taiwan until you were 13.
And then I moved to Canada and then the States. So these two names really sort of grew on me after I met Mike and John in Taipei. And I looked at the stuff that they gathered, the interviews they've done in the past, and just thought this was really amazing relationship they had. And I also felt how passionate about creating this documentary from Mike and John, and just thought super interesting and took on the project.
Mike, what was your memory of Rafer Johnson?
I got to know Rafer in California when I was living in L.A. about, 12, 14 years ago. He lived in Los Angeles. I used to go and spend mornings with him and C.K. Yang's widow, Daisy, at Daisy's sister's house. And Daisy's sister would make scones, and we would sit around and we would talk. I bitterly regret not having had a TV camera with me then, but I don't think it would have been quite the same sort of quality of conversation. Rafer was this immensely imposing guy. I mean, he was big and strong, and when I met him, he looked like he could still go and win the decathlon. I mean, he was really fit, but he was just humble and modest and friendly and very devoted to Daisy Young and very devoted to CK's memory and very eager for their story to be told. He's a very well-known figure in the States. I saw in the Los Angeles Coliseum, big stadium in LA, there was a plaque that said Rafer Johnson was one of the 100 greatest athletes of the 20th century and so on. And he was still very much in the public eye because he was the kind of face of the Special Olympics, where he was deeply involved for many decades. But he was very eager that the story of his relationship with CK be told. And he had a lot of funny stories and insights to share about what these two guys were like when they were both, young and in college and hanging out together and training together and competing together. So he was a wonderful guy.
He wrote a book about their friendship.
He wrote an autobiography. And one of the things that we were lucky to discover in doing the film was we had these hours of interviews of C.K. Yang. But Rafer Johnson's wife casually mentioned when I was visiting her about 18 months ago, oh, did you know that there's an audio book of Rafer's autobiography, which Rafer himself recorded, and here it is. Thank you very much, Mrs. Johnson. Suddenly we had Rafer's life story in his own words. And that was one of the keys that unlocked the whole film, because then you could have CK and Rafer in their own words talking about so many of their experiences.
That's right. You complimented footage of interviews with CK with audio of Rafer Johnson. So 18 years on after this journey, at that moment you released the film, what ended up being that story that you wanted to tell?
Well, Frank did, I think, a masterful job of bringing these two guys to life, incorporating into that the search that John Krich and I sort of conducted to try and find them, which gives it a contemporary element. It was deeply moving. And as I've seen the reactions from people who've watched it, who talk about how moving they find the film, it's really touched me a lot.
Throughout this process, we talked about various ways to present this story. Early on, you guys toyed about making this as a feature drama film. And then, we talked about doing it as a feature-length doc. And then I think it wasn't until our decision of bringing you and John into the actual film, the story actually took off. Because I thought this persistency, of John and Mike, after so many years, they still wanted to tell the story and pursue this story. And I wanted to include them into the actual film. And they actually made the film, I think. Just this process of search and John coming to Taiwan so many times to visit CK and me. So that really took the project over the years, I think.
And it became a kind of a gradual peeling back as we discovered more about them. So it wasn't just, old sound bites from two old guys who are dead and that's it. It made it much more kind of relevant and contemporary, and learn as you watch the film, different things get revealed about each person's background and life and the struggles and so on.
Was there a favorite moment from the film that we can maybe play a clip of?
I love that part where CK attended Rafer's wedding and he was taking that photo with the old camera. That was really neat, and he was making a really, goofy face. And so that really it shows their friendship, and it was a really intimate moment that we had in the film. So I really loved that scene.
There's also a moment where at the end of the decathlon, which Rafer won by just a fraction, where Rafer says, and you can play this quote where he talks about how as happy as he was, he felt bad for CK, and as bad as CK felt, he was happy for Rafer. I mean, that to me encapsulates the friendship right there.
Well, let's hear the clip.
As good as I felt about winning, I felt equally bad that my friend had lost. As bad as he felt about losing, he felt equally glad that his friend had won.
There's so much footage in the film. There's home videos, audio recordings from the Johnsons families, interviews with CK Yang, interviews with other athletes. How many hours of footage did you comb through?
I lost count.
Yeah.
I mean,
a lot. And as often happens, there's a lot more that didn't make it into the film that we combed through, and people that we talked to that we ended up not using. But it's hours and hours and hours. It's a kind of a giant process of exploration and discovery. Mm-hmm. We looked through film archives here. We spent countless hours online digging up things. For example, I found online an audio recording of the honorary banquet when the coach who coached Rafer and CK, who had the wonderful name of Ducky Drake, was retiring it from UCLA. And for some reason, this was put online by somebody. And it's got Ducky talking about Rafer and CK, and it's got Rafer there and CK, both of them talking about each other and Ducky. And it was an absolute goldmine, and it was just complete luck that I stumbled across it. So a lot of it was just trial and error and casting a huge net, hoping you pull something in.
Yeah, I mean, all the trips that we took to Taiwan and Kaohsiung, and, you know, we met CK's niece, spent some time with him, nephew, and tons of interview materials that wasn't used, you know. So it was quite a fun and interesting journey.
Taiwan, because that's where he was from, his home for his late life was there, and Kaohsiung because that's where the national arena is today. Throughout the film, there's footage of his old house when he came back after the win, after the silver in 1960. He was hailed a national hero. He was given a house, beautiful house. It's decorated with Olympic-like decoration. But then at the end of the film, we see it again. It's in a much different state. What is it like to be in that space? Because you never got to meet him.
No, it was strange. It was not in a state to be occupied in. I think the best way to put it. I did walk upstairs to the second floor, and there were cat, feces and a lot of trash on the floor. It was just not a pleasant space to be in. So we made sure that a big part of this film contains the message that, should this building be renovated or in any way be thought of as a place to memorialize CK. And we posed the question, and hopefully it would bring about an awareness to this issue.
Did you talk to athletes today who talked about whether the role that having this great figure it had in their athletic career, or it showed that he's really not in the public discussion anymore?
We did spend some time with this decathlete in Taiwan. He's currently the top decathlete. His name is Chen. We thought we were going to incorporate some of his story into our film, but decided not to. But he did share with us that Yang Chuan-kwang is always a name that's up there, right? People want to catch up to his record. He's still quite a ways from it. And he talked about his name and his influence even today, right? And he also talked about how inspiring it is that he actually pursued a career and wanted to be better, and then was sent to the U.S. to train with U.S. athletes. And that's something that some of these athletes in Taiwan aspire to do. So it became part of their dream too, part of the goal that they wanted to someday travel to the U.S.
But one of the interesting things is that, Wang Chen was a decathlete, so it's natural that he would derive some inspiration from CK. But when John Krich met CK and went down to Kaohsiung and kind of hung out with him, he was struck by the fact that a lot of the younger athletes then, and CK was kind of hanging around the National Training Center, available to sort of as a resource. And John was struck by how relatively few of the younger athletes back then actually took advantage of his being there. People didn't come over and say, "Hey, CK, what do you think about this? What do you think about that?" And John felt he was kind of a lonely figure in the later years of his life, that the younger people then didn't pay him much attention. And so just to reinforce what Frank said, one of the goals we hope, or one of the consequences of the people seeing the film, is there'll maybe be some momentum to try to give CK the kind of memorial that we all feel very strongly he deserves.
You had shot footage of the statues of him performing in different events, and I would love to see those statues out somewhere.
Yeah.
But so CK, after he retired from sports, he went into politics. He was a member of the parliament for 3 years, and then he ran for county magistrate, where he was from, and he passed away from a stroke in 2007. So compared to how Rafer Johnson is remembered in the U.S., After he retired from sports, he became an advocate, an activist, and also an actor. You mentioned Special Olympics, so he helped to establish the Special Olympics. In 1984, when the Summer Olympics came to Los Angeles, he became the first Black athlete in the world, in history, to light the Olympic cauldron. He passed away in 2020 at the age of 86. I want to ask you, as an American, what did Rafer Johnson's public service mean for you? What was it about the American zeitgeist at the time that you think that allowed for an athlete to transcend their work into public discourse? And is it still possible?
Well, what's interesting about Rafer and about CK is that they were among the very earliest athletes who became political symbols. Rafer kind of sought it out. He was outspoken in college. He was early Black elected president of the student body at UCLA. And he was involved in politics mostly through his friendship with Senator Robert F. Kennedy. And had Kennedy lived and become president, I think Rafer might well have had an important job in the government. But, the thing about Rafer was he was all about helping other people. And his civil rights stance was outspoken, but it was not confrontational, unlike some more radical figures. And in fact, in the film, we talk about how Rafer came under pressure from more radical Black activists to boycott the Rome Olympics in 1960. And his response was, I can do more for the cause by going and carrying the flag as the captain of the American team, and then by winning as a symbol of Black achievement. And so I think he was a really beloved, venerated figure, and his work for decades with the Special Olympics, with people with disabilities. There's so many photos you find, Rafer with, kids with disabilities and stuff like that. It's really sort of warms your heart to see it. So he was able to become that kind of symbol without the sort of confrontational, antagonistic quality that we see with so many athletes who become political symbols in more recent years.
Frank, when you see that, you specialize in these superstardom Taiwanese athletes for your work. What is it about Taiwanese fans of what Taiwanese fans want from our athletes?
I think in terms of sports, and politics and things of that nature, it hasn't kind of gotten into the public conscious as much as the U.S., or not until the last, I would say, 2 decades, right? So we talk about baseball, right? Sometimes there's a term called a one-day fan, right? 一日球迷, right? But in reality, there is a growing public interest in these sports figures. And we see, every few years, there's this new sort of pride of Taiwan forming and becoming a new symbol for Taiwan. So I think CK being one of the original, right? One of the earliest. And it's been so long ago that he's already faded in the public memory. So I think it made a lot of sense for this type of film to come out at this time, especially during the Olympics, that we started to look back in our history and start seeing the importance, right? Their contributions, their meaning. He once put Taiwan, or Formosa, or ROC on the map. And they have a special place in our history. So they deserve a special place physically and in our memory. So that's why we're sort of advocating, creating a physical space, a museum, a small sort of hall of fame for people like CK and all these newer generations of athletes that we're seeing today.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think it is that for Taiwanese athletes to be competing in the world, that itself is a statement that we're here.
Yeah.
Hey, if you have enjoyed the Taiwan Take and would like to support Ghost Island Media, we take monthly donations on Patreon. We're at patreon.com/Taiwan. And please give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This helps other people find the show. All right, thank you. And back to the show.
I want to switch gear a little bit. I want to talk about Chinese Taipei. Chinese Taipei is the designation for Taiwan at the Olympics. Just a quick background for listeners who are not familiar. Over the past century, the people of Taiwan have competed under many different names at the Olympics. When the island was under Japanese rule, athletes here competed as part of Team Japan. In 1948, after the arrival of the Chiang Kai-shek's army, they competed as China. Then for 20 years, from 1956 on, the team competed under various names, from the Republic of China to Formosa to Taiwan. And during those 20 years, the official ROC flag was used. You can see this in the film. And then come 1979, the IOC, the International Olympics Committee, passed a resolution that Taiwan would adopt the new name Chinese Taipei. 2 years later, a new agreement stripped Chinese Taipei team of its national flag and national anthem at the Games. I wanted to just ask you what you were feeling when you were working on the story, given that circumstance. For me, as a Taiwanese, when I watch this past Olympics, or at every Olympics, right? When I watch footage of our athletes at the podium, they're winning gold. They're saluting to a flag that is not ours. They're hearing a song that is not the national anthem. And within the Olympic setting, any mention of the word Taiwan by the fans or by athletes can get you booted out of the stadiums. For me, as a citizen, it's hard not to feel slighted when you're reminded that you're in this impossible political situation. And there's often talks here in Taiwan about, why can't we change our name? Why can't it be Taiwan? And when you talk to national athletes, they'll tell you, no, please don't. They'll tell you that to do that, it requires exiting the ROC and then to re-enter. And once you do that, you might not be able to come back. So here you are handling hours and hours and years and decades of footage. Frank, you were born here until your teenage years. What goes through your head when you see that?
I mean, it's a complex situation. It's something that I don't think a 45-minute film can solve, or I don't think we consciously put any emphasis on the film.
I mentioned that just because I think for when it's talking about Taiwan's Olympics, this comes up.
I had to look into the history to understand, like myself too, because it's during that period of time, it was either Taiwan, Formosa. It was every 4 years, it's a different name, I feel like, at the time. So I myself was confused too, but it's, like I said, it's a complicated situation. It's complex. I don't think we Taiwanese here in Taiwan have a consensus. I don't think we can agree. None of us can agree. So why blame the external forces if you can't even come to an agreement within your own country? And it's sad, right?
In the film, it's interesting. C.K. Yang in his life had 3 separate sort of encounters with the Olympics, and each one was shaped in one way or another by this contest with China. And in 1960, not only was he under pressure to become the first person with a Chinese surname to win an Olympic medal, but the IOC had told the government in Taiwan that it could not use the name Republic of China and had to compete as Formosa. And Chiang Kai-shek, who was running the country, running the government at the time, was so angry he almost ordered a boycott. And the only reason that he didn't was because he thought C.K. Yang could win a medal and bring glory to Taiwan. So that was an added pressure that C.K. faced. And in fact, the authorities here were so angry about this that at the opening ceremony, when Rafer Johnson marched in as the first African-American to carry the American flag, the Taiwanese team marched in bearing a placard that says, "Under protest." And it's the first overt political protest by a team in the history of the Olympic Games. And then in 1964, Rafer had retired and CK was the odds-on favorite to win gold at the Tokyo Olympics. But he came down with this mysterious ailment the day before the decathlon event was due to start. And by all accounts, a teammate who at the end of the Tokyo Games defected to China had put something in his drink, spiked his drink to make it unable to perform well enough to win a medal. And CK then went into a tailspin for a long time. He wasn't the national hero in the same way anymore. It was very hard for him. But he pulled himself together and became the coach of the track and field team for the 1976 Montreal Olympics. And they arrived in Montreal only to discover that the Canadian government had just established diplomatic relations with Beijing. And yet again, Taiwan was being told you can't participate as the Republic of China. And this time the government was so angry it pulled the team out. Part of what makes our film today relevant in a contemporary sense, because the issues that shaped CK Yang in terms of these kinds of identity and representation and Taiwan's place in the world, you fast forward 60 plus years and you look at the headlines and they're the same headlines, just as is Rafer Johnson as an icon of the civil rights movement. And you fast forward to today and what do you have? You have Black Lives Matter, social justice, all the rest of that. But it is a very complicated issue. And Frank's absolutely right. People here don't agree. And then you have the crude power politics involved. China is big and strong and powerful, and the IOC is beholden to it. So what are you going to do?
Mike, you spent a quarter of the century as a foreign correspondent covering Asia, a lot of it China, Hong Kong, and also
30 years, but who's counting?
30 years.
A quarter century at CNN,
That's right.
And then more for NBC and CBS.
Thank you. A third of a century covering China, Hong Kong, Taiwan. Can you give us a sense of, let's just hone in on the Olympics and Chinese Taipei. As a foreign correspondent, what you have to consider when you're writing stories on the Taiwan team. So not for this documentary, but generally as a foreign correspondent. What is that like to have to figure out all that politics?
One of the challenges, the politics are extremely complicated and the audience generally knows very little about it. And so the challenge is to try to find very short, a couple of sentences that you can use that explain Taiwan, the self-governing island which China claims as its own. I mean, there are all these kind of formulas that people fall back on, and there's often a lot of debate, and there's often journalists get a lot of criticism because people feel they didn't get it right or they missed the nuance and so on. It's very, it's complicated, and just as covering China is complicated. But, Taiwan is this sort of small place of outsized importance to the world, both economically and geopolitically. And geopolitically, it's important because there is always the potential that something very bad could happen here in terms of conflict with China. So you do have this responsibility to try to find ways to do it without giving the audience a huge essay that they're going to just tune out of. And especially this day and age, you just click on something else you're interested in. So it's a challenge for foreign correspondents.
And for you, Frank, you're making these documentaries. They travel through film festivals across the world. The Wang Jianming stories happens in the U.S. Ultimately, it's a Taiwanese athlete in the world. Do you feel that pressure of having to do some justice of Taiwan, given it's a small place with big significance that's always thriving for representation?
I don't think I'm stressed. I don't think it's a pressure. I think it's something that I actually make sure I emphasize enough for Taiwan. Even though we know the stars in my film are from Taiwan, I wanted to make sure that the achievement, the visibility, the publicity that they received outside of Taiwan is emphasized enough in the film. And it established the importance of the character. It tells the audiences a backstory of where this person is from. So I make sure this part is well covered in all my films, whether it's CK Yang and my upcoming film on Zheng Yani, right? It's still going to receive that type of attention that, through them, we see Taiwan. So I make sure of that.
What is coming up next for you two?
My sixth book is coming up next, which is about North Korea. Almost done with the book. A few more chapters to go, but it's on the docket at the moment.
Amazing. Anything else you could reveal about the book?
The book is the story. I'm working with a very interesting Swiss woman who has the longest continuous history of humanitarian engagement with North Korea of anybody. She has made close to 100 trips there, including a half dozen trips a year during the worst of the famine. She lived there for 5 years running the Swiss government's development office. She ran her own NGO working with disabled people. So since the early 90s, this woman has been dealing with North Korea, walking this very fine line between how do you engage in a system like that with all of the horrible things that characterize North Korea, while actually getting help to the ordinary people who are not at fault for being born North Korean, but who need as much help as they can get. And it's a very, very interesting story. And as far as I know, no one else who's ever been in that position has ever written a book like that. The books about North Korea are either the big geopolitics, the nuclear issue, missile issue, or the sort of, I escaped from the horrors of the secret state. So a book about what it's like to be an aid worker trying to navigate your way. What do you do when to buy 1 million tons of rice and get it to people who are hungry in that system? And she's done this for close to 30 years. So that's what the book is about.
That sounds fascinating. You've been there 17 times.
Yeah. So I have a special interest in it.
Do you have enough visuals and footage and stuff that you can make into another film?
Well, this woman has hours and hours and hours of video. So one of the possibilities might be when we get the book done to look into whether or not there's a documentary to be done about her.
Frank, what is coming up next for you?
I just mentioned I'm making a film about Yani Cheng. She was the #1 golfer in the world from 2011 to 2013. 2 straight years. Top golfer in the world.
Her records then were better than Tiger Woods.
Tiger Woods, yes. Her achievements were just astonishing. But so is her fault, right? She's struggled to find herself, find form since 2013. Never won another tournament, and she's still playing today. So the film is, started making this film since 2020. So it's another 4 or 5 year project in the making. But throughout this time, she's been through 2 really major surgeries on her hip, and she's still trying to find her way back to the LPGA stage. And throughout this process, she's also battling depression. So that's one issue that we'll delve into in the film as well.
Thanks to you, I got a chance to interview Yani last year. She was a beautiful human. Thank you. Thank you both for coming in today. It is a typhoon day today.
It is.
And thank you so much. But
thank you.
We'll try to get you out before it starts raining. I really appreciate it. Finally, before we leave, are there screenings coming up that we should know about?
Oh, there's one this weekend in New Jersey, Rutgers University.
The film is available for streaming on YouTube. On the Taiwan Plus Docs YouTube channel. And we're looking into various other public screenings, but we're still sort of in the process.
Okay, so if our listeners are in the U.S., they're in Europe, they're anywhere they are, can they reach out to you for a screening?
Of course, yeah.
This is great. Well, please do. And how can they get in contact with you?
Email us.
You can send me an email. It's mikechinoy@gmail.com.
There you go.
Shy.
It's a brilliant film. It's so touching. It's so well made. We didn't even talk about the animation that you spend so much time on. It's a beautiful story. And the photo of C.K. Young and Rafer Johnson collapsing onto each other, I mean, that is just like forever etched in my mind.
Well, that's one of the iconic photos in the history of sports. And if anybody who doesn't know anything about Rafer and CK, that might ring a bell, because that's really one of the great sports photos that's ever been taken.
Thank you so much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The sports documentary Decathlon, the C.K. Young and Rafer Johnson story by Mike Chinoy and Frank W. Chen is available for streaming online at Taiwan Plus and on YouTube. We'll have links in the show notes. We'll also have links in the show notes, your emails, So if our listener, you would like to organize a screening, you could reach out to them. This has been a Ghost Island Media production based in Taipei, Taiwan. I am Emily Waiwu, and this episode is made with help from Zach Zhang and Wayne Tsai. Our intern is Ethan Chan. Thank you for listening. See you next time.